Hi, hello everyone. We are going to work on the front wheel bearings of 2005 Cadillac Escalade today. You can find many GM SUVs with the same procedure. This vehicle is a rear wheel drive, so there is no axle shaft at the front, and the wheel bearing assemblies come in as a hub assembly, as a whole unit. So it is fairly easy to replace. You can do it on your own garage if you wish. So we'll start with removing the wheel first. Now the wheel is off the vehicle. I always like putting the wheel underneath of the vehicle as an additional security. And once the wheel off, you see the rotor and the brake assembly. So the next we'll need a kind of special socket, which is T55 Torx. For the pads, if you look at right here on the back of the brake pad, so this is the brake pad assembly, and here is the stud bolt runs, and there is a little the plastic piece in between, and on the other side you will see it's kind of dark here, but yeah, you can see it right here, the Torx bolt. So our special socket will go in that perfectly, and I got this Torx. If you don't have it as a set, you can buy it from I bought it from Home Depot. It's about a little over $3. It's not an expensive piece, and it goes with the 3/8 ratchet. So we'll go ahead and remove those. All right, so we are removing the caliper bolts. So they are a little tight, so I used a little bit of pipe extension, use it as a breaker bar. You can use if you wish, but they will definitely come out. Here are the bolts, put them in a secure place. And now we'll take the whole caliper off. Be careful with this brake hose. Now, this is the important part. You need to put the caliper in a secure place, so you shouldn't let it hang because it will break the brake hose. And the best place is, it looks like the upper controller arm. You can just bend it a little bit and make sure you are not damaging the brake line, and you can just sit it on top of it. And if you are not sure, to prevent it from falling off, you may want to just tie it with a zip tie or a piece of cable if you wish. Next, we'll take the brake pads off. So they are located on a tray here. So one on the back side and one in the front side. They should just come slide off very easy. If you are going to use the same brake pads, do not mix. Make sure you know which is which. So I put the back one to the back side of the vehicle, so I know it is for our back side, and the front one is going to sit near the front. So next we will take this bracket off. So this bracket, you will need a little bit muscle power for it because it's tight, but it's doable. So it's an 18mm bolt located on the back side. So what I do is usually when I put my open end wrench, I get one more bigger size and use it an extension like this and just force it, and it wasn't bad. It was actually not bad at all. Let's try the upper one. That wasn't bad at all either. So just 2 bolts hold that bracket in place. And once you take that 2 bolts off, it comes right off. So now, next, we'll take the rotor off. To take the rotor off, if most of the time, if the rotor is never replaced before, or sometimes at the shops, they put those clips. There are like the circular clips that they go on the studs, so they prevent rotor from getting loose. Well, it shouldn't get loose when it is assembled anyway, but during the installation they just put the rotors. Just it gives extra security. My trick is using a scrape tool like this, and just find the end of clips and lightly bend the outside of the clips, and then you will be able to pull it towards the front of the stud, and after one point you should be able to just turn it like you are unscrewing a nut, and they will come right off. So don't lose it, we will use it again. And here is the other one. Pull forward and the same way. All right, now we can take the rotor off. Well, it is already loose, and then rotor will just come off, just like that. So we'll send these rotors to the shop to resurface them, because I'm going to install new brake pads, so I would like to make sure all the surfaces are pretty flat. Now we have access to the wheel bearing assembly. It has only just 3 bolts on the back side, but before we do that, there is one more step we need to do, and that is to disconnect the wheel speed sensor. Before we do that, we need to make sure, and you may want to take pictures if necessary at this step, the routing of the wheel sensor cable. So let's take that brake caliper away for a moment. So the the wheel speed sensor cable comes right on top of the control arm, and there are some holder pieces over here, and it goes above the strut assembly, and there is a connector that I will disconnect. I now move the caliper away because I'm going to disconnect the wheel speed sensors cable. So you can use a pair of pliers to squeeze the connectors and just pull them out. They are pretty easy. And there is one more over here, one more clip that we can just pull it off. Here is the connector I'm working on. So there is a shield that blocks the wheel, but what I'm gonna do is there is a clip on top. I will just pull it and it will come right off. and it won't be loose because there's another clip holding from below. I will just disconnect from that clip and that cable will be coming loose. All right, back to the action again. So there is a little clip that holds the connector of the sensor. So I'm pushing with pair of pliers from the bottom. And if you damage the clip, that's also fine, because the new wheel bearing assembly will be coming with new wires and new clips. Here is the connector off, and just a little piece of clip still inside, so I need to take that off. And you may want to cut that clip if you don't want it, because the new cable, new assembly will come with new cable and all the clips already installed, so it will be very easy. All right, now the wheel speed sensor is off. Remember the routing of it, so it goes on top of the control arm, and here now we have, so let me relocate this caliper assembly on top of the control arm. Now it's a good time to check the brake lines as well. Now, it's a good idea to check your brake lines as well. So this is all truck. We want to make sure while we are working on the brakes, we took the caliper off, so we can inspect the brake lines too. So brake lines do not show any cracks. Usually you see on those lines. And this part is also looking fine. Goes all the way to the connector. I don't see any issues, but one issue I found is right below the brake line. You can see where the brake hose meets with this bracket or holder. There's a cut. So that cut is dangerous, and it's actually, I'm glad I saw it, because usually in a rush inspection, this is a point can be missed very easily. And what can cause it is we may lose the brake fluid and lose the brakes eventually. So I'm going to go ahead and order new brake hoses on both sides, and replace the brake hoses along with the brake pads, and we'll resurface the rotors. Right, here is the wheel bearing hub assembly, and before we take that off, there are 3 bolts located on the back side. It's a little dark, but they are located right here, and one on top over here, and one on other corner. So those are the only 3 bolts in this area that holds this wheel bearing assembly. We'll go ahead and remove those and take the, here's my ratchet. Nope, it's tight. So let's use an extension. Be careful. Yep, it started turning. Good. So it's loose. So let's do another one. It's loose. So let's do one more, but on that corner the ratchet doesn't fit because there is a interference from a ball joint, so I have to use open end wrench On this one, in this case, I'm using the extension method, but I use this a lot. So I just use a size bigger wrench on the end, on the open end of the wrench, and just use little force. It's loose. Okay. It is always a good idea to compare and make sure the bearing you got for replacement is the exact same with the one you pulled from the vehicle. And also, it's a good idea to inspect the wheel bearing. So this is the broken wheel bearing. You can see this part is not actually exposed in the new one, and this was a working one, but I don't think it's in good condition, because you can see some grease already left the bearing from this side. So that means there's a crack or a tiny hole on this part. So because this is completely sealed unit, and at one point over here it says, yeah, non-serviceable. So that means you cannot just disassemble this hub assembly and repack the bearings or put new bearings in. About this wheel bearing, this is factory OEM. This is because it's the GM vehicle, it is AC Delco, and here is the box for it. When ordering, there is a little trick. So the part number, you need to find the correct part number for your vehicle, and when you are finding the part number, I recommend AC Delco's website, because you can enter some more information about your vehicle. For example, I realized if the vehicle is made in Arlington or assembled in Arlington or somewhere else, the wheel bearing is slightly different. The common part number was coming up differently when I looked at it, but after entering some more information into the website, like this engine is a 6.0 engine with N VIN number code, and there is also another engine code that you can find in the glove box compartment, which is the engine code for this vehicle is LQ9. This directs to this part number. So this is the correct part number for my vehicle. So we are going to install our new bearing hub assembly over here. It came with new cabling, so I will leave it on for now because we will need it during rewiring. And remember the plates and remember the direction. So it is going this way onto the hub, and the bearing goes there's a little window over here that goes on top of the electrical connector, and here the bearing goes like this. It's seated in its place. Now we can start putting the screws in. After everything is in place, you can just hand tight the screws. So here is our torque wrench we need to use, and according to spec it is 180 Newton meters. So that's a very tight spec. So we'll go ahead and torque all the screws. This is important because you don't want to make it too tight. It may break the hub assembly or the screw itself, and you don't want it too loose because with all the vibration they can come loose. we are not torquing all at once. We are going to do it one by one. Here's our second click. So I will just, to make sure, check the tightness. I should be able to move it at all. Yep. I'm not tightening it more, I'm just checking its tightness to make sure they are tight, because those 3 screws are the only thing that holds your wheel bearing in its place, and if they got loose, you would lose the wheel. Okay, tight. So our wheel bearing is in place, it's all nice and tight. In the next step, you can just route your wiring and connect it to the connector on top of the strut, but I'm going to skip that step for now because I'm servicing calipers and brake assembly. So there's going to be a lot of work needs to be done in this area, so I'm going to worry about the wiring later, but I will remember that. So next step, we can go ahead and install the rotor. Need to clean it a little bit. And the rotor goes in its place, and you can just double check the bearing to see if it is moving freely, not grinding against anything. So rotor is in place, and if you remember, we removed 2 clips, and now we'll go ahead and put those clips back on the 2 studs of your choice. And with a little bit help of hammer, I will lightly seat them in their place so they won't move. Now, remember this bracket. This bracket goes next, but because I'm putting new pads in it, and new pads came with these clips, there are metal clips on each side, I'm going to go ahead and remove them and clean this bracket with a wire brush before installing it. These new clips, and they are not they are directional, so you have to find the correct side, otherwise it won't fit. But when you fit them, they should go in very nice and tight without any gaps. So this side goes this way, this one goes this way, and here is an important step. Well, when you get the OEM part or good quality aftermarket, they usually ship it with a silicone grease. So there are several places you need to use that silicone, and one of them is the back of the brake pads. So this is the front pads, front of the pads going on the rotor side. You are not putting any grease, but in the back side you just grease it completely. I mean, just a little grease, not don't put a lot of grease, because then that grease may end up at another location that you don't want for, especially working on brakes. No grease or no other contamination should exist in the friction parts. So also I put little grease with my finger to these grooves, and do it for the other pad. Then remaining grease will go into the clips. I will actually end up putting more grease in the caliper too. So clips, especially the portions that pads slide on, needs to be greased lightly, because otherwise you may have a pad sticking problem, which will show up as noise when you are braking. So after a bad brake job, a lot of the times people complain about brakes being noisy. So that means not everything is done right. There is one screw on the bottom. Again, if you did everything right, the pad should just slide right off. If there is any resistance, check for problems. And here is one more, goes on the back side. All right, we just installed the pads. Now the caliper, so that caliper won't go directly on the pads, because these pistons are adjusted according to the position of the old pads. So when we install the new pads, we need to push these pistons back, and there are tools to do that. You can even loan it from a local parts store. I don't loan one. I'm just using a technique which using an old brake pad, the old one, the one you are not going to use. So do not use the new pads. You can push it against the pistons and use a clamp like this to carefully push them back in. But you need to be very careful because you don't want to force and break anything, especially the piston itself. So because there are two pistons, I'm going to do one on this side a little bit and on the other side a little bit, so they go inside pretty much equally. If there is one piston, it's easier because you can just do everything at once, but don't force it too much, because it may break the pistons. And if you are unsure, you can always use the loaner tool from your parts store. They usually resist at the beginning a little bit, but eventually they go in. And in some cases, your caliper may be stuck. That's usually indication of a brake problem. You should experience symptoms like the vehicle is pulling because the one side brake is stuck. If you don't have any symptom like that, your caliper should be fine. But if you are unable to push the piston back, you may need a new caliper. So in this case, it seems like it is going in without any problem. And caliper should not be leaking any brake fluid when you are doing this process. Again, if there is any brake fluid dripping while you are pushing the pads in, the pistons in, then you need a new caliper, because that means your caliper is bad. So the pistons needs to be almost flushed with the caliper body. You also may want to check with the brake fluid level in the engine while doing that, because when we are pushing the pistons in, it is pushing the brake fluid up, and if your reservoir is full to start with, the brake fluid will come out of your reservoir, and in some cases it may actually damage the reservoir and the master brake cylinder itself. So be careful. This is an important process. Now I think we are almost done with pushing the cylinders in, and they went in smooth and nicely. So we will do little cleaning inside the rotor assembly with wire brush, and especially the sides needs to be clean when you install the caliper on the brake pads. Okay, here is a little extra step that is usually optional, but it will prolong the brake's life. I will put little silicone grease on the sides of the caliper where brake pads sits, or brake pads railing sits. And with just the residue that remains on tip of my finger, which is there is not plenty of grease, I will put it right on the cylinders, because they are pushing the brake pads and there's a lot of friction when they do it. And a little bit on the opposite side, just a tiny bit. It is not going to be, don't put a lot of grease in there. Again, you don't want grease to move and go on the friction parts. Carefully handle the caliper. Make sure no brake hose or anything is twisted, and it goes right on top. And there are some rubber boots that you need to help with your fingers, and they are going in. We will clean the caliper bolts first. And I will also apply small amount of silicone grease on the bolts. And one caliper bolt goes to the bottom, you need to make sure it is lined up nicely and the rubber boot is not crimped. Remember our T55 socket for the bolts, so you need to use that. Okay, and let's tighten it a little bit. Now the caliper bolts are tight. Well, I usually check the brake work after I put the caliper assembly together. You should move the caliper assembly back and forth, and there should be play, and that is very normal because the pistons are all the way back and right now there's a gap, but that movement back and forth shows that everything is sliding on the rails, especially the pads. The rotor should not move because we put the clips, but the pad, the caliper assembly should just move back and forth nicely on the clips that we installed. So we are not done over here. We just need to make sure after we do this, the brakes needs to be pumped before you drive the vehicle, because the first if you try, you won't have any brakes. The pistons are back, so the fluid needs to push the pistons in. So and until it takes a few pumps, full pumps to the brakes, and until then you won't feel any brakes. So it is very important that after we do the brake job, and especially if we push the piston back, we just need to make sure the reservoir is full, and we sit in the vehicle, pump the brakes until we feel it's nice and hard, and then we can start the vehicle and move it if necessary. So I'm going to stop over here. The next is if you are not replacing the brake line, which I'm going to do next, you can just put the wheel back together and torque the lug nuts to the specification, and you are done.